Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really provocative idea from our source material. What if modern Japan's whole promise of freedom is kind of an illusion? What if, hiding just beneath the surface, there's a social system that basically decides your fate the moment you're born? And this one question, it's the key to everything we're going to talk about today. You know, Japan's constitution guarantees that everyone has the freedom to choose their own path. But our source is asking a tough question. Is that promise a reality, or is it just words on a piece of paper? Okay, so let's kick things off by looking at the trade-offs. What did people gain, and maybe more importantly, what did they lose when they moved from the old, super rigid system to today's promise of freedom? And this slide really lays out a fascinating contrast. I mean, think about it. Back in the Edo-era system, you had zero choice in your career. If your dad was a farmer, you were gonna be a farmer. End of story. But in exchange for that, you got stability. Your place in the world was secure. Now it's completely flipped. We have the idea of freedom, but that old safety net, it's just gone. And this leads us to this really powerful and kind of dangerous idea, self-responsibility. In the system we have now, if you don't succeed, society basically tells you, hey, that's on you. It's your fault. But the author asks a really challenging question. What if the game was rigged from the very beginning? This idea is absolutely central to the entire argument. So, let's dig into how this actually plays out. The author argues that we're seeing these new, invisible castes being created by things that are totally outside of our control. Okay, so the first pillar of this hidden system is something you would probably never expect: the year you graduate college. Seriously, think about it. If you're just unlucky enough to finish school smack in the middle of a recession, like Japan's famous Lost Generation, your chances of landing a good, stable job just plummet. Your entire career path could be decided by pure economic luck. And a big reason for this is Japan's really unique once-a-year mass hiring system for new graduates. It's almost like there's this one train that leaves the station just once. If you miss it, you get left behind, and it's nearly impossible to get back on that main track to a stable, full-time career. Now, this slide just perfectly illustrates the second pillar, what the author calls the academic filter. You can literally see the chain reaction. A parent's wealth can buy access to better education, cram schools, tutors, which gets you into a better university, which then opens the doors to much better career opportunities. So when all the top companies recruit almost exclusively from these elite universities, what are they really selecting for? The author argues it's not just about intelligence, it's about parental wealth. It's basically a modern-day form of inheritance. It's just hidden behind a fancy university degree. But the barriers don't just magically disappear after you get your first job. Let's take a look at the really rigid walls that exist even once you're already in the workforce. And this isn't just a corporate thing. I mean, look at politics, which you'd think would be the peak of democracy. In Japan's parliament, about a third of the politicians are hereditary. They basically inherit their seats, their funding, and their voters from their families. This slide shows this incredibly stark divide you can find inside a single company. You can have two people doing the exact same job, but one is a regular employee and the other is non-regular. And as you can see, their job security, their pay, their future, they're living in completely different worlds. The comparison here is just so powerful. Trying to cross that line from a non-regular to a regular job is seen as being as tough as a farmer trying to become a samurai back in the day. It's a wall that can literally define your entire life. So what is the single biggest, maybe the most insidious, difference between that old obvious caste system and this new hidden one? Well, it really all comes down to one thing: visibility. The old system was unfair, for sure, but at least it was honest about it. Everyone knew the rules. Today's system hides its barriers behind this myth of freedom and meritocracy, pretending the deck isn't stacked against so many people from the start. And that is why the author calls it an extremely cruel mechanism. It doesn't just limit your opportunities, it also convinces you that any failure is entirely your own fault. You end up internalizing the blame for what is really a systemic problem. And that leads us to a really difficult question to just sit with for a minute. When we're told to take self-responsibility for our lives, how much of our outcome is truly within our own control? But this isn't a completely hopeless picture. The author is actually really careful to point out that the system isn't perfectly sealed. There are some cracks in these walls, and they might actually show us a way forward. For instance, take civil service exams. They're based on your test scores, not your background. Or look at the companies that are starting to hire people year-round based on actual skills, not just the name of their university. These exceptions are so important because they prove the system doesn't have to be this way. So these little bright spots, they actually suggest a potential path forward. The source points to solutions like moving away from that mass hiring of new grads, actually enforcing equal pay for equal work, and giving real educational support to level the playing field from the very beginning. Which leaves us with this final thought to chew on. It's one thing to have freedom written down in a constitution. That's formal freedom. But it's another thing entirely to have the actual tangible resources and opportunities to use that freedom. That's substantive freedom. And bridging that gap, according to our source, is maybe the most important challenge facing society today.